So we are continuing with the book, The Sun Does Shine by Anthony Ray Hinton. And I know some of you picked it up. I don't know where you're at in the book, but if you haven't started it yet and you choose to get it, I highly recommend that you also make a trip to Costco to get plenty of tissue. Because it is a heartbreaking true story. And this morning we're looking at moving beyond our story. And just to encapsulate, Anthony Ray Hinton was locked in solitary confinement in a 7-foot by 5-foot cell for 30 years on death row in Alabama for a crime he did not commit. Literally 30 feet from the death chamber. Now, if you know anything about Alabama until very recently executed folks on death row via the electric chair. If you've ever burned yourself, just the little bit of hair that you smelt gives you just a teensy tiny little bit of what those folks on death row experience every time someone was put to death in that electric chair. And Anthony Ray Hinton's cell was 30 feet from that death chamber. He witnessed 54 people be executed during his 30 years. Now, if that man can find a way to live beyond his story, what's my problem? In all seriousness, I mean, and he did, and he's still finding it. And part of his process was when he was convicted and he was moved from the county jail to the prison. You turn this down just a fuzz, it's echoing just a bit, Frank. Thank you. He got to his cell and he had his bag of personal belongings. And the first thing he did was look through and find his Bible and threw it under his bed because in his mind, God was dead to him at that point. It must have been, his words were, God has forsaken me. And I can imagine that it had to feel that way in the human experience. Because he had followed everything he was taught. If you have nothing to hide, tell the truth. And so he did, every step of the way, including telling them that his mother had a firearm because he knew it wasn't used in any crime, so there was nothing to hide. Didn't stop the state from manufacturing false evidence. Okay. So for 3 years, his first 3 years in prison, the only time he spoke was when he had a legal visit or when his family visited. He didn't speak to a guard. He didn't speak to another inmate. He did not utter a word to anyone other than his attorney, his mother, and his best friend. And what he realized in that process is that he was becoming the people he hated. That he found himself wanting to kill the same way they wanted to kill him. And it woke him up. Now, he wasn't sure what to do with it at that point. The imagination is an amazing, amazing thing that we were born with. And so he began to leave his cell through his imagination. And the first place he experienced that was he went to see the Queen. In his imagination, she had invited him, shut down everything to give him a private tour of the palace, had tea with him, and he was so far into his imagination that the guards were calling his name for like 10 minutes and he didn't even hear them. And what he recognized was that that was the place where he could escape a physical reality that he couldn't live with. And he, long story short, he took that to the warden because he recognized that everybody on death row was suffering from this. I mean, imagine living in a cell that is 5 feet wide, 7 feet long. You have a toilet and a bed. That's it. It's hard to live in that space. It's hard to live in that space when you know that you're coming out of there to go down the hallway. And so he went to the warden and he petitioned the warden to start a book club because he recognized that if he could get some of these other guys to start reading and talking, he could help them not be so tortured. And he began to move past his story. Now, on death row, the only book you were allowed to have at that time was a Bible. That's it. After Anthony got done chatting with the warden, they could have 2 books. And they could meet, 6 of them at a time, in the library under real strict rules. And they could actually talk. And they began to do that, and people began to heal. And one of the best friends that Anthony Ray Hinton wound up with was Henry Hayes. And if you know anything about Henry Hayes was the KKK member that committed the last murder by hanging when he hung a 19-year-old black child in Alabama in our lifetime. And what happened in that relationship and in that conversation was healing. Because Anthony Ray Hinton recognized that Henry Hayes only hated because he was taught to hate. That Henry Hayes was not born hating anyone. And that the core of Henry couldn't hate. And he began to go back to his teachings that his mother raised him with, that in God all things are possible except one thing, and that's failure. God cannot fail. And he kept going back to that and going back to that and working through his own hatred. And before he was released, the guards are coming to him for counseling about their finances, about their relationships. And this is to a man that wasn't even in a relationship and was committed to never being in a long-term relationship. But what he counseled them, what he talked to them with, was from his heart and from a place of clarity that had let go of the hate. Did he let go of the events that happened in his life? Hardly. He's still dancing with the state of Alabama because while he was awarded $1.5 million, they haven't paid him anything yet. Because their mentality is he never proved his innocence. Well, you can't prove my innocence if you drop all the charges and take away my opportunity to do that. So it's the manipulation of planet Earth. Okay? And I bring that up because it could easily be an excuse for Anthony Ray Hinton to go right back into hatred, but it's not. He's out living his life. He still lives in Alabama. Why does he live in Alabama? Because he loves Alabama. He doesn't love how Alabama treated him, but he recognizes the whole state of Alabama didn't do something to him. Individuals, a legal system, enacted an unjust course of action that impacted his life. To move beyond our story, which is really, folks, the story, we all have one. You can't move beyond your story. You cannot stop telling your story. Because if you do, birthdays are out. Okay? You don't get to have another birthday because your next birthday is predicated on the story of your birth. Okay? All the diplomas and stuff hanging on your wall, go home, throw them out. They don't matter. And that's just not true. Evolution has points on it. Our story is our evolution. When we say let go of your story, what we're really talking about is quit being a victim of the past. That's what we're really talking about. Because when you're celebrating, no one ever tells you to let go of your story. When you're talking about how wonderful it is to have been married to this amazing individual for this many years, nobody says, you really need to let go of that story. Nobody does that. Okay? I have a confession to make. I went to bed with one woman and I got up with a different one. In fact, I do that every day. And so does she. She goes to bed with one husband, she gets up with another one. And you are not the same person that walked through that door at whatever time you walked through that door. See, that's the place we have to get to get out of the victimhood. Okay? Your life is changing right now because you will never be the same you after hearing this talk, sitting beside whoever you're sitting beside. We are constantly evolving. And the story that we need to let go of is the one that wants to take us backwards. And why do we want to keep going back to that? Because we're trying to change something from the past. Because if I can just change that, this will change. Ain't a word of truth in it. First of all, you can't. Okay? I mean, how many of us have worked really hard to change our parents? Anybody been successful? Any parents ever been changed by your child? Anybody want to say, my child changed me forever? No, they don't. If you change, it's because you change, not because somebody changed you. Nobody has the power to change you. They don't have the authority to change you. And we cannot go back into yesterday and change anything because it's done. And if we will let it be done, it will really be done. But we have to let it be done. How do we do that? We have to, okay, we live in gold country. We have to become miners. Okay? We have to become miners of our experience. Because every experience has a nugget of gold. Do you know what it is? In that most horrific experience, have you found the nugget of gold? Because if you haven't, and you're still holding on, find the nugget of gold, and then fill in the mine shaft and move on. There's plenty of others to explore. And if you've run out of mine shafts to explore, go grocery shopping. Go to the laundromat. You'll create some new ones. Because as long as we're interacting with one another, there's plenty of experiences that are going to grow us and challenge us. They don't have to be big and huge and horrific. Anthony Ray Hinton's story puts a lot of things in perspective for me. Many of you know I was a childhood drug addict. And when I say childhood, I mean childhood, 7 years old. Okay? No regrets. And I invite you to join me there because everything that I experienced brought me here. And I'm real good with that. Every abuse in my life brought me right here. See, the thing about evolution, if any event in the chain of evolution had been different, humanity would look different. I don't know what it would look like, but I know it would look different. Science teaches me that. We don't throw out the evolutionary chain. We learn from it. And here's one of the coolest things we've learned from it. It has gaps. There are gaps in the evolutionary chain that we cannot explain other than spiritually. And so science begins to justify spirituality. See, will we step back far enough to see the whole picture and embrace it and then use it to move us forward? Because if creation is nothing else, it is an eternal, perpetual, never-ending process of evolution. Evolution is always forward. There's a clue. It's not backwards. We can't evolve backwards, grab something, and bring it forward. You are what got brought forward. Your story is how you got brought forward. So if you're standing in an experience of you now that you want to change, guess where you change it? Now. You don't go back there to change you. You change you now. Because you're not back there. Okay? And nothing that happened back there broke you. You ain't broke. There's nothing in you broken. Can't be. Can't be. Because that would propose that something in the divine can be broken. I don't think so. I don't think so. Now, I can't prove that. I could be wrong, and I'm willing to risk being wrong to live in the magnificence of creation ain't never broke. We just sometimes forget that we're that. And sometimes we have to find out that we're not broke by going through someone else. Okay? Anthony Ray Hinton had to remember that Anthony Ray Hinton wasn't broke, but first he had to journey through the Alabama legal system to do it. He had to find a way to forgive the unforgivable. Because most of the stuff that puts us in that stuck place can't have a victim without a villain. Okay? And so maybe, just maybe, the most powerful thing that moves us out of our story into the present is forgiveness. And forgiving the seemingly unforgivable is the most difficult thing that I know of in this human experience. And it's a level of forgiveness. I will offer you this, then we're going to close. That level of forgiveness means coming to a place where you accept the apology you are never going to get. Okay, did you catch that? To accept the apology you're never going to get. Doesn't mean you don't deserve it. There is no one in the state of Alabama that has yet to apologize to Anthony Ray Hinton, that has yet to take one shred of ownership, and he is not letting that stop him. Okay? If he can do that, we can do this. Let each other out of the box that we've put one another in. Because that's what villain and victimhood is. We put our villains in a box, and then we chain ourselves to it. And the only thing we have is misery. Accept within yourself the apology that you absolutely deserve and may never get. Let's take this into prayer. Knowing there's only one infinite, ever-present allness, that it is peace, poise, power, clarity, infinite abundance, absolute intelligence, pure love, pure light. Knowing it is all there is, I know that it must be my life. Knowing that there is only one and that all iterations of creation are made out of it, I know that what is true for me must be true of all. And so each and every form of divinity is that divine in form. Fully infused with it and its characteristics, its brilliance, its abundance, its peace, its power. The very breath I breathe is life breathing me. And what is true of me is true of all. So I can let go of any resentment. I can let go of any picture I have in my mind that tells me any iteration of the divine is less than what I know the divine to be. And so I speak my word, claiming and affirming a life of that clarity. That as I look into the eyes of divinity, I know I am looking into the eyes of purity. That I'm no longer fooled by people's behavior. And that I see beyond my own behavior as well, to the core of my being. And I call that up into the evolution of my manifestation, walking more and more and more clearly in the divinity that I am each breath. Knowing that as I do this, I am part of healing the whole, because there's only one to heal. Grateful to know how this truth works. Grateful to know that as we heal our individualized expressions, we bring clarity to the whole. This is how we are awakened as a people, as a culture, as a world that does work for everyone. And so it's in this gratitude that I release my word into that activity of love and law that already made it so. And I just get to see how it unfolds. And I invite you to join me if this is your prayer as well, as we say together, and so it is.